Thank you. I feel like my heart's always squished on the
Yep, they're good.
Okay,
we are already 10 minutes delayed, so we will get started on the Human Resources Committee work session. We are taking a pause, or we're taking a pause from the conversations that we've been having related to hiring, the hiring process here at ICSD. Zach Wind is here to talk to us specifically about the exit interview process that ICSD is currently undertaking, so that we can have a little bit of discussion about what and why and what opportunities there might be to do things in alternative ways. And then we are going to have just an intro conversation about tenure recommendations process and the focus areas with which are focused on for those processes. We are probably not going to get to 4.3 partially because I was delayed on the agenda, and so didn't give Zach and his team ample time to even think about talking to us about that. So we're going to talk about it at the next one. I apologize ahead of time for that, but I guess it's not going to be
I'm sorry. Could you approve or not approve the minute?
just before we go any further, do we have any public comment today?
We do not. No.
We have no public comment. Now we would like to move to approving the minutes from the February 3rd, 2026 work session. Okay.
You don't have to. You
We
don't
just have to approve.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I have.
I approve.
I
Approved.
I'm not.
Oh, you're not. Oh, I was like,
That's all right.
how does he look at you? So I was like, I guess you're on the
I looked,
committee.
I said,
Oh, okay.
all good. I'm so sorry.
That's right.
Zach, thank you so much for being here today.
Sure. Good evening. So our first topic that we're going to talk about, I did put some slides for all of these, but it's very just sort of a reference point. For exit process, I think I duplicated that one. So just jump to slide 3, I think. Then go, right there. So exit interviews, the reason we're talking about this, just to get out, is that there's not a strong process. So this is pretty much what we do right now. When folks depart, and I'm going to pass this down, this is the exit interview survey that gets sent out. But when folks depart our organization, we send out an exit interview survey. Staff have the option to request an interview in person. And typically in a given year, 2 to 4, highest being maybe 9 surveys come back. Typically we have 2 or 3 in-person interviews with usually Gladira or Bob, and notes are kept on file for those as well. That's sort of the process right now. There's no no key performance indicators collected. There's no, it's just sort of I was looking through our historical records on this. A lot of this comes out of 2006. It seems like there was discussions at that time, and those discussions were largely, just about developing a process, but the context was very different. Having been a classroom teacher myself at that time, not here, but in another district, the turnover was much lower, and it was a different ballgame. So I say all this to, maybe this is a good time to sort of think about, if this is a process that we want to dedicate to, what would be the items that the board would want to look for and know about. What are maybe the pain points, what do we need to do? So that's my intro to exit interviews.
Just 2 questions about this slide. So when it's sent like in this form as opposed to electronically?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And then how many staff members depart per year? Not like
it's a good question. So it depends what we call a staff member. And the reason I say that is we have subs and we have a whole, but if we're talking about like members of the ITA, EA, and ESPs, I would have to get you, I'd have to sit down. Ballpark, I'd say we probably turn over 50 to 60 teachers a year. And then the other groups are probably lesser, probably like 10 to 30, depending on.
Okay. Just to clarify, I guess I'm asking how many people receive this survey?
So those folks are all supposed to see the survey. Are there some that don't? I'm sure that's happened. Since it's not ever been a key driver of our operation, it's not a detail I've spent significant time looking into. So for those viewing at home, the survey is mostly just ask folks what their roles are, how long they've been in the district, what influenced their reason for leaving, what was their opinion on a whole host of things, ranging from salary to dental plan to the equipment available while working there, and then asks for ratings on sort of like the work culture, and then also feedback on supervisor. And then there's a whole bunch of sort of like short not essay, but like paragraph questions, asking about, why you joined the district, if you're moving to a new job, what makes that job, why are you doing that, what constructive feedback you have, what you did enjoy, and if you recommend people work here. So that's sort of the short version.
Yeah, so it seems like we could revamp a little bit the questionnaire style. Looks like the last time it was updated on the bottom says 2011. I guess that seems like easy. I guess the question that I had was sort of like, how has this information been available in the past? Like, does it get compiled? Who gets to look at it? I think that's probably more of the question that we had. Like,
Yeah,
as a board, it would be nice for us to be able to see a compilation of this data. Maybe no one's dissatisfied with what's being collected, but maybe just that we haven't been able to see it.
I would say the sample size is so small that it's not like it's not worthy of looking at, but I would if this is the focus area, I would focus on how we can get a higher yield on our return, like the return on these sent out. I'm probably digitizing them, and then how do we capture that information and store it? So if it's a physical file, like the challenge right now is we don't have a good system. Like this might, like, let's say you were an employee and you came and then you left it and you did fill this out. That's great. It's probably going to your personnel file, but we don't necessarily have a record of over the last 20 years, which people did and didn't turn it. So then we'd have to like piece through each file. If we wouldn't have it, we certainly could.
And then also, I guess you're making a good point too, like when you were saying the number 50, and then you're saying the sample size is small, I'm thinking that most people who leave at the end of the year don't do this.
Yeah.
So we might have 8 people out of the 50 who just make them.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so like one question is how to get people to complete it. Another question is how to share the data.
Yeah.
And know how many people, I guess, complete the question.
Yeah, I mean, like, to me, it's probably the first step is digitizing it, right? I mean, maybe if people want, we can do this as well, but I guess the digital format is going to both help us in capturing that data, right? If it dumps directly into whatever system we're using, we'll store that and keep that over time. So that'd probably be an appropriate first step. And then the second piece is how do we encourage completion?
What's the rationale for it going in the personnel file? Am I just not understanding?
So anytime we have sort of formal communications with staff members, we keep just general records on files. We keep a whole host of things. It could be a update on someone's certification, the way of keeping track, because very frequently we get requests from departed employees, current employees for, hey, what do you have on this thing?
I guess my mind doesn't go to logistics yet. I guess my mind goes to sort of like vision and goals, right? So I wonder about if the goal is from it. I feel like exit tickets, you can learn about what's working and what's not, right? As a board member, I would love to see on an annual basis a presentation of what % of our folks leave And just broadly, the category of like, what's the reason, right? Like, because if 50 people if 50% of people are leaving because they're moving out of state, that is an interesting data point versus versus 50% of people leaving because they moved 5 miles to get paid more or not. As I know, like at least the IT reported was the case as part of negotiations. So I'm curious about. So I'm curious what are our respective thoughts on that being a purpose, so that we can see what are like why are folks actually leaving, and then to make plans based on that to address that. Does that sound like a good reason?
Yes. And also trying to encouraging people to do the exit interview. Since it's optional, but I guess there's different ways, like if it's kind of like if this is just passed out as like one piece of many papers versus like somebody saying, it'd be very helpful before you leave if you could please fill out this exit interview that helps us figure out things in the future, and it's anonymous, so it's okay. Whatever. That might be.
Yeah, there's a whole range of ways we can approach that. There's everything from your last, I'm not saying you should do this, I'm just saying everything from, hey, you're gonna get your last paycheck, you can turn your computer keys, whatever items you have, and you're going to meet with someone who's gonna ask you these questions and report it, right? That's a very formal process that some organizations do. There's probably we just would need to right size that, and that would probably take some chats internally with our teams about like what's appropriate, and then do we have most our departures occur at the end of June, so like do we have the personnel to do that? I'm not sure, but then there's probably some survey models or some ways to a short survey might yield some of the data that you'd want. As someone who gets a lot of survey for like professional organizations, I mean, if I saw this, I would I'd just keep it moving and not fill it out.
Very honest.
Yeah.
And some of the things, no, that makes sense. Some of them are very easy. Like the first 2 questions could just be pre-filled out.
Yep.
For them, like type of position held, nobody has to answer that. Length of service in the district, we know that.
Yep.
So now we've just eliminated the first 2 questions. We could probably make this a lot shorter, and even having it be fewer pages.
Right.
Will be less.
And if it's checkbox, that's even better, right? So you just do it.
Can I, since this is a committee meeting, and so the structure is a little less formal than our board meetings. I see someone from ICA here, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'd really like to have input based on what you hear from your,
So I will give you that I am not the one who does a lot of those exit interviews. That is gonna be a lot of our president, because she has that release pad. But they are either face to face or on a phone. Right, they are conversational in nature. Mostly because it is our experience that surveys just don't yield feedback. You don't get participation. They're not an effective method. It is our stance that there's a huge amount of power in the one-to-one, right? And having a natural conversation with someone where you can dig deeper into questions, and you can probe into avenues of response. I know that's not exactly kind of the question you're asking, but that is what I have on the spot from my experience.
I think that part of what I appreciate about Aaron posing the question is what I have been thinking is like a partnership with ITA and how to work with her and the other unions, which ties back in also to what Jacob was saying about like what's the goal of doing this. There are so many different goals that can be aligned with exit interviews, whether they be really like a granular in nature or really thinking kind of bigger picture about how to improve the organization as a whole, or is it improving, the school as a whole? It also had me thinking about, is it really, the HR department at central office that should be doing these, or is it the principal who has a relationship with these folks who can really can hear that kind of feedback in through a different lens? And that would kind of depend on like what the outcome is that we were really looking for. So a big piece of that would be what that information is, because improving things like at a school level is going to be focused on very different things, and the goal of that would be very different than thinking about at the district level. That would be more thinking maybe about pay or bigger issues.
I'll share to co-sign what was shared. From my personal experience, I guess running exit interviews and doing exit interviews, I agree that like it should be, hey, can we talk? And if they don't want to talk, then it's would you feel more comfortable writing, as opposed to the other way around. Just to add around the personnel file, personally, I wouldn't fill it out just because it's going to be in my personnel file, like, because whether I say positive things or negative things, just like I don't want that associated with me. And I also just want to name that with given the current state, which I think like you very nicely identified as it's a thing that we like that's happened that we haven't really followed up on, and now we're revisiting. The most effective exit interviews, I think, are just like, what led you to stay for as long as you did? What caused you to leave? What other feedback do you have? Because I think that like those 3 questions would yield the data that I would want to see as a board member, would be respectful of people's time, and that would allow us to grow the process from there. I think anytime there's like a process that's being revamped or redone, the simpler the better. So I just wanted to name that would be, in my mind, like an ideal thing going into next year. Just a simple practice that gets more people filling it out, simple data that we can then see and plan around. And that's open-ended, that allows people to like truly, say what they're thinking.
Do we have barriers identified? Like, do we know statistics on how many of these are completed versus who is exiting? Like,
yeah, and so I think you're looking at 5 to 10% maybe, which is, it's a very low number usually.
Like 2 out of 50.
Some years it probably has been, yeah.
But it's more than 50, right? But this is 50 teachers that are.
Yeah, right, yeah, so it's right now, I don't think we can point to it as like the baseline's minimal.
right.
It's probably the floor of what, like, anything we did would be a iterative step above.
And do we get valuable information from these surveys that inform practices moving forward? Do we see these as an avenue to help? I'm just curious, when we think about efforts and what we're doing and the amount of work that you have going on, like how we can spend our time in a way that is efficient and cost effective, that can also produce something worthy of changing practices in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would probably warrant a larger discussion, because ultimately to get, I guess we'd have to think about, and I'm not an expert on the statistics that we would need to know the right level of responses, but there's probably a baseline number of responses we'd want per year that would give us data that was actionable, right? If you're getting 2 a year, it's just really small and hard to know. But if you're getting 30, that's something to work with. So then it's a question of how do we get it, and sort of what sort of personnel staffing do we put into it. One of the things I always wonder is, you have to do it to find out, but what is it? When I like reverse engineer the process in my mind, I think, what is it that we would hear that would, what are the variables out there that we might hear, and then how would we react, right? So that might inform, like, what are we looking for? What are we trying to find out? And then, what are the board sort of goals and thoughts on how it will inform your directions going forward? So everything's on the table, I think.
Yeah, I think that exit interviews are a evidence-based, long-held HR practice, and the reason that they are utilized so frequently across organizations is because they do yield really powerful information can get definitely utilized. So I think it sounds like we can certainly access more of that information for the board to be able to understand kind of more broadly about the value of a process like this. It also seems like we need to, if there's interest in thinking further about this, there's a question about ensuring that there's evidence-based practices that were like strategic
Right,
practices that you're actually following, so that we know actually from evidence about whether this kind of thing is effective, or to one or two questions or whatever it is. So I think we would need to see some experts that can help us kind of think through that. Then there's the piece about thinking about any kind of partnership opportunity with the NTA, partially just because they've already been doing this work with the same contingent of folks that or what other contingents of folks that that the HR department would be interested in doing as well. So to be able to kind of learn and collaborate with one another. Also, I think that thinking about being at least aware, if nothing else, of what the ITA's goals are in their exit interviews, there is benefit to having some alignment, especially because we just watched public negotiations where that data was those data were provided and called out quite a bit from the ITA, and like with all of the other data where it was very helpful to see both like the data that the district was presenting and seeing that side by side where what the ITA was presenting. I think that this was one area with which there was a real like missing component there of not being able to kind of look at those pieces side by side. And so having never watched a negotiation before, that alone made me feel like it would be valuable information for the district to be able to hold to either support or combat the narrative that they are hearing from other groups. So I don't know if people have like any other specific questions about this. I think that if there is any interest from the committee about continuing to have this conversation, it seems like we would want to get some of that other information about the benefits and how to do it, and see if the full board would be interested in advocating for it.
Well, maybe it's a process question. Is this the sort of thing that the full board decides, or is this because it sounds to me like you want to do it.
I think we're open to it. I don't, I think the helpful information from the board would be, and it could just be this committee, is what is the information that you would hope to find out from it, right? Maybe this survey we have is perfect and we just need to figure out how to get a higher return on responses. Maybe, there's a couple different ways we can do it, but I think the most helpful piece would be what information is the board seeking specifically. And if we have that, then we could probably build out some models and talk to folks who have done this more in other organizations and do some fact finding on our own. So I think that would be the biggest piece, in terms of action items on our side. I see no reason not to digitize this. I think digitizing it and then maybe letting you all take a look at it, just see what we have. Even if we just took this, digitized it, modernized it a little bit, that would probably be a good step. And then mock up some workflows of how people might get that timeline around it.
And because I thought you had said earlier that you wouldn't fill this out. Was that simply because of the handwritten nature?
Yeah, usually like when there's like 6 written responses where I'm gonna sit down and like if I'm not focused on it and just like someone just handed it to me, I'm unlikely to. And then that's more about me talking about like surveys that get to my email every day from different organizations, right? I get 5 of those a day, so I'm just.
I think I'm thinking about some of the questions or ideas that were raised, and so I guess I'm curious, like the idea of an in-person connection with the digital option. What is your reaction to that?
Well, there's 2 parts to this. I believe you had said that if you're doing an in-person interview, then you've lost anonymity, right? So I think you have to we have to sort of figure out where we want. Now, we could collect that data and store it anonymously, but
Right.
you know, if someone's talking to an HR leader about some issue that they feel like has not been addressed or considered, like they might not be as open to speaking about it as they would to the ITA folks. Like that's what I would expect. I don't, but so that's the only reaction on that is just the time and labor that is related to it. We'd have to really think about how we could get to everyone because it's it's a considerable piece of work to do that. And do we outsource it to our building leaders? Then that's something for them to have to take on. Do we have a couple people that do it? Do we have set days? Like, just to figure out how it all works.
We'd also, and with the question around like simplifying the questions or like reducing them significantly, what's your reaction to that?
I don't know that I have a reaction per se. I think it's more like conversation where I guess it's like, again, what is it that we could simplify it, but what are we going to point to that, right? So if we simplify it, are we going to do questions about job satisfaction related to salary? That could be a very simple question, right? It could be, so that's where the board feedback would be really helpful. But yeah, simple's good. I mean,
Well, why are you leaving? It's really the biggest thing that I think we want to know. But if somebody says I'm retiring, it's like, okay, then it's like, move on. But I think there's only a couple of things that we really want to know, and so we probably could boil it down. And then I'm just wondering, I don't know if this is possible, but like maybe this would make it very complicated. But I just wonder if people could have I wonder if there could be an option. Do you want to we before you leave, we want you to do an exit interview. You could do it with HR, the ITA, your building leader, or you could fill out an anonymous survey. Which modality would you like to choose? And then because I think it matters so much. The relationship that people have, they may not want to talk to IT, they might want to fill that out anonymously, they might want to talk to the building leader. That would make it a little complicated because you're giving people a lot of choices. I know there's some negatives to that, but if it increased the response rate by, 5 times, it would be worth it.
yeah.
Correct.
I disagree. I
That's
think
crazy.
I have such strong feelings about it. Because I just worked in, I think that it needs to be the direct supervisor who's getting feedback about. I don't know, there's so many different pieces. I definitely don't think it can be like IT, it can be like one of the options, because the whole point is that kind of both representation. I would love them to be able to hear and get feedback. But yeah, I think it's more of, yes, it would be great to have options, and I don't think that it's that much of I can't think of a like high quality manager, supervisor, leader who wouldn't want and wouldn't benefit from feedback from their direct reports about how things have gone, why they're leaving, things like that. And I think that if it was something more like direct reports, it would allow for more meaningful change at the level that would have biggest impact. And then, of course, if it's something major like how salaries are set, which is not within their purview, they can share that, upward. But again, I think like we've all probably had experiences with this. We could all throw out a million ideas, which is why I kind of say, if we're interested in continuing the conversation, it's probably like the next step is to actually get some to some agreement about like what the mission would be for even doing this work, and then therefore who would most benefit from hearing it, is it being available, what questions should be asked.
So next step.
So next steps would be finding out, well, for me, it would be finding out like where do we need to have that conversation with the board, how do we kind of,
Me too.
we would
right?
probably have that
I
conversation.
feel like we
yes.
should email
Mhm.
Tom and request it. But I also do think like from your end, because if it's the board's job to figure out what is the information we want, I personally would be really curious from your end, just what are best practices, evidence-based, what are different methods either from other districts or.
Yeah, we can come back with that. And
we generate them.
And it's
right?
not just what the board wants, right? Like
Yeah.
this need to
what is
benefit
that we
the
need too,
different
but
and yes.
there's if we Venn diagram at that, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
I'm also struck by the thought of there's probably the perfect system, and then there's a good system that we could start with and then iterate and tweak going forward, right? It would probably be multi-year to sort of calibrate it into the needs of our district. So yeah, next steps could be, what does the board want to see in exit survey data, and then we could mock up some different models, report back on how different districts are structuring this, and start at least taking some, like digitizing our current ones. I think would be a simple win. Building it into some workflows of when people resign, to at least start sending that out digitally. I think that's pretty great.
Oh, great. And can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I mean, typically, when we do get these filled out, is it more, for lack of a better word, disgruntled? Like thinking about people who are angry that fill them out? Like, should we consider incentivizing doing these exit surveys in a way that we get a full picture of why people are leaving, rather than just people who want to air grievances? Not that we don't want to hear the grievances, but we want to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of answered your own question in terms of like the folks that fill it out probably would skew towards like frustrated, right? So, but can't say it's every single one of them, but certainly some of the ones I've reviewed are along those lines. And sometimes it's things that, fair frustrations, but we wouldn't be able to prevent, right? And then sometimes it's things like, oh gosh, it would have been great to know. So yeah. What was the second part of your question?
Well, I think it's more, is there a way to incentivize people doing these so we get a full picture? Because I just think about like customer service. Usually people don't say, oh, it was great, I just blah, blah, blah. It's usually wanting to, again, air grievances. So if we want to get a full picture of who's leaving and why, and clearly understand the different dynamics playing into this.
Yeah, I mean, so I think you can incentivize by either, say, all right, as part of your last day, you come to HR, you come here, you have an exit meeting, and you make that part of it. You'll still lose some folks who, go on a leave and don't come back, and that'd be a little bit harder. But there's probably some methods along those lines that would yield sort of a final checkpoint. Probably get you most incentivizing. I'm sure there's some incentive structures out there for that. About the legalities of someone, but yeah.
Great. Thank you. We will return back to this. Appreciate your candor. Sharing. We will move on to the second item, which is tenure recommendations process and focus.
Great. I have a couple slides and some data to go with this, and this is really small, but short version. Tenure's we talk about tenure. The main thing is it's a board action, right? The board question.
Sorry, Emily was asking about it.
I was just saying that I put this on board docs.
Oh yeah, sorry, I just got this done before. So tenure is a board action, right? In New York State, usually a probationary period is 4 years. It's in most cases, because in some cases it can be 3 years if you have prior tenure for that same tenure area. Sometimes you'll see people at 3 years. Superintendent will make a recommendation, and that's the process we're going to talk about. And then the board takes formal action via the personnel board. I put this here. Tenure is earned through satisfactory performance, meaning you get a recommendation to supervisor, then to HR, superintendent, then to you. Just being here is not a guarantee of tenure. That being said, if the board does not take an action, teachers are tenured. Like it's a clock. So if there's no action taken, the default is to tenure. And these are just summaries of a much more complicated process, but teachers are evaluated under a negotiated APPR agreement. We're actually going to be negotiating and restructuring this. So what I'm talking about today could be a bit different next year, depending how that goes. And when we evaluate teachers, we use typically we use the Danielson rubric. However, there's a number of other certification areas in New York State that we have a different rubric, the sort of non-teaching rubric, which is it's just different. We'll leave it at that for now. And folks are evaluated that way. And the main thing that you all want, you know, one, you make the recommendation, but also for us, if we ever need to do reductions in force, things like seniority, recall rights, all that piece, you have to be tenured and you're lined up in those processes. So that's sort of the summary of the tenure process. And then I have some data around the number of teachers that are in our system right now that are untenured. Or do you want to ask questions about this?
Before we go on to that, can you just define APPR, talk a little bit more about the negotiated agreements and what that looks like?
Yeah, that's actually, if you just hop to the last slide, there's a bit of that. So APPR is across this in New York State, we have to bet you're gonna do it better. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can talk to you about it. The annual professional performance, right? So APPR, we are currently under the 3012D system with some modifications that came into play in July of 2024 when Hochul signed the new law that allows us to move forward to what we call the STEPS system, just the standards-based evaluator and professional support system. We have right now, if you were to go on to this website, you can find the APPR document. It is a negotiated document, and it is considered an extension of our contract as written. So we are beholden to that, as well as kind of the systems that are outlined in it. New York State, it defines a group of teachers which are required to have those annual professional performance reviews. And for our not yet tenured members, that does require that they are having annually a set of 4 observations, at least 2 of them that are announced. They have unannounced. They're supposed to be getting an observation from an independent outside observer. It's a big process with lots of timelines, and it's a burdensome process, I'm not gonna lie. We also have a group of folks that Zach has actually split these up into we can kind of see. We have another group of folks, for example, our counselors, social workers, pre-K, who are non-mandatory, but they have been negotiated into our process. And so they have a parallel, but not exactly the same system. Right now, those observations are done by our building leaders, as well as anyone else who has been BOCES approved to conduct those observations. So mostly it's going to be our administrators, our building leaders. However, there are a few other staff who have had that approval and are doing those observations as well. They are looking at the Danielson rubric, which is our primary kind of, right now, that is what we're looking for. And folks have to demonstrate competence in all 4 areas of the Danielson rubric. At the end of each evaluation cycle, those evaluations are reduced down to a HEDI score. So highly effective, effective, developing, or ineffective. And we have different meanings for what evaluations at those different levels, how those impact our staff. So for example, if someone isn't developing, we have to offer them a teacher improvement plan. We give them a coach. We try to fix them and get them along their way. Frequency and deadline. Let's talk about those things. Those are fun and exciting. One announced. So 3 for our probationary. So 1 announced, 1 unannounced. The announced is going to be a class long. They're going to come in. They're going to see things start to finish. They are looking especially at Danielson. They're going to be looking at the complete Danielson. Our unannounced, also called walkthroughs by different building leaders. You might hear different vocabulary used. Those are meant to focus exclusively on domains 2 and 3, which really is about your ability to instruct in your content knowledge. For our not yet tenured folks, the deadline to have 2 announced observations and 1 unannounced observation is March 1. So a couple days ago.
Yeah, the March 1st deadline here is if you're in your final year, that's where we would work with the teacher to either to let them know well ahead of time, like, hey, you know, we're not going to be pushing you or recommending you to the board for tenure versus well, we don't necessarily tell them, we just have to tell them if we're not gonna do it, so. That, to be clear though, that does not preclude, like, that's based on our observation process, right? If there's a whole, if there's other things that could disrupt that.
If there's
but-
any number of things that might also impact the granting of tenure or not, right? APPR is just one element in it, and with that that 2024 revamp of the laws, it cannot be the sole reason that, right? We can't base tenure denial on APPR scores. That is that is part of that 2024 law.
Right,
But it can't,
but if someone's continually in effect.
Sure,
Yeah,
like there could be other reasons, but it can't be, that can't be the all end all. Right, it can't be APPR score, that is the sole determinant.
What are examples of other things?
But again, we might see, there might be other factors beyond just the observations and that formal observations, which would inform a building leader to make that recommendation or not, right? When we're looking at APPR scores, those really are just limited to that time that you have an administrator in that process, right? There are gonna be other things that are gonna happen that might inform a building.
right, like, really simple, but this is the easiest one, it's like, if someone is, you know, it's not gonna show up in an evaluation, but chronically not submitting grades or non-responsive to emails or not, you know, engaging in appropriate professional practice, right? That might not come through in the APPR, but there could be other reasons.
but if someone. This is the hypothetical, I wanna make sure I understand, but if someone, every observation scored low in all four elements of the Danielson rubric over the course of 3 years, they would still get tenure.
Well, so we've got several pieces that have come into play before then, so we're hoping that that's not gonna happen, right? Especially in our first year, we have lots of strong language about effectives and ineffectives and getting a coach into them, those people to support them right away. Right, we have systems to try to use this as an informative system to provide supports for our teachers so that they can improve and show that.
When you say we, are you talking about?
I'm talking about
Well,
the collective.
Because if a teacher's repeatedly scored low in their observations, we're going to set them up with a TIP, which is a teacher improvement plan. It's gonna be a collective conversation with the union, the teacher, and the building leadership, and even sometimes district office, but usually not. So, yeah, and usually that would or should be happening in years 1, 2, 3. So the hope is that they wouldn't get, and if they're not successful in those things, that would be sufficient evidence to not move them forward.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's a fun and delightful process. We have a pre-observation, we say, hey, this is what's gonna go down, folks come watch the thing, and then we do a post-observation and say, hey, did you see that thing I did? Also, here's some things that you missed, right? So the whole process is that moment in time of the classroom, but it's also a conversation both before and after of the planning, the strategy, the follow-up. The what change did you make when you delivered this lesson at another time? Right? You saw me give it this version and I didn't like how that happened. And so when I presented it later, I shifted this. And you should know that as the observer, that I was monitoring that process.
Just a few things on my mind with this that I'm just curious about. I feel like informally, I have heard from some principals or administrators, just like the amount of time that goes into this then could distract or like from, I mean, and it's necessary, right? It is a required thing, I understand that, but like can actually, that there might not be adequate time and personnel to engage in these. Plus to, in my mind, this is helpful for determining whether or not someone gets tenure. I don't think there's much research or evidence around these driving instructional improvement as opposed to instructional coaching, which does. So I'm just generally curious. I'm curious to know more about like when you take into account what's required by bargaining efforts and by the state, how many hours does it actually take to do this, and how many what how many hours do personnel have to do this and all of their other job responsibilities?
Yeah, so this, we've all identified this as a pain point, in terms of the labor, the time, particularly as it relates to the announced observation process, because you're doing like a formal pre-meeting, then you're going observing, and then there's a follow-up, which are all good. And I would say, having conducted these, the follow-up meetings, there's actually some really great conversations that can be had about, because really, when you're really looking at something for 40 minutes and you have a follow-up conversation about like, why did you take the lesson in that discrete angle? There's actually some really good value there, but that does lead us to the district will be working on with the union on a new process for this. And we're certainly open to some conversations about how we might structure those in ways that, again, get us to the information we need, but maybe in a more expeditious fashion, or how we capture that. So, yeah.
So when you,
Steps program, I'm so excited.
very excited, when you are bargaining, what are the pieces with which you're focused on bargaining? And I guess I'm coming to that with the question of, I assume that the district will, how do you, if there are many teachers that get tenured, and then in future evaluations, or just, you know, a strong building leader working with that teacher, continuing to think like, oof, like that would inform you probably that like the tenure process maybe isn't evaluating the right things, or so I'm wondering like how you all make that determination. I guess it sounds like in partnership of like reflecting on is what we're using to evaluate tenure through APPR like currently working, is it like producing the outcomes that we're hoping for, which is that only high quality teachers or teachers that are providing high quality instruction are actually being tenured? Like how do you assess like the impact? Yes.
Well, so I think it's good. It comes down to actual observation. Like the most linear way of thinking about it is the observation process, right? So if I'm gonna use the Danielson rubric or the MPPR rubric, you're looking at each area and you're rating competence. Things to know is that in subsequent years, even after tenure, the teacher can still be put on an improvement plan now, which happens from time to time. So there's recourse available, but I think that answers some of your question. And then the second part of just like how do you the second part of your question is just sort of
I guess I'm wondering like how you kind of reflect on the decisions you're making in the negotiations about APPR, but now I'm realizing is what you're negotiating, just what tool?
Yeah, like the tool and process, right? Like,
Right, well, so we're really just at the start of this. I had a meeting last Wednesday where I invited members of ITA as well as members of administration to come together and to let them know, and I along with I worked with Mary Broker and Klinkowski to introduce steps to compare it to, so it's 3012E. So to compare 3012E to what 3012D, what changes took place, and start to gather what hopes and wonders we have as we approach this new process. Some of the key standouts, if I may, are increased collaboration between administration and our teaching staff. Recognizing that, at least from my perspective, and this is, I don't want to speak for our admin, but this is my hope out of it, is that we allow our administrators to really give a lot of their focus towards our newest members and supporting them in their first years before they get that tenure, because the STEPS program does bifurcate the requirements for not yet tenured versus tenure. I say I could use not yet tenured rather than untenured because, hey, I'm here to support my folks. Allow them to shift focus, because one of the key provisions of the STEPS program is that we are using multiple metrics for observation and gather data, or for rather not for observation, but for gathering data. Observations are one required component, but it must be combined with at least one other metric. And the state provides us with a smorgasbord of options to choose from. And so as we are starting this conversation and starting this negotiation process, that's what we're looking at and saying, what are these other methods that we have that are going to be supportive for, that I'm looking are going to be supportive for my folks, and are going to allow our administrators to, again, give the focus to where it's most needed, and to then allow my members, right, our tenured members, the ones we said, hey, you're good here. You and to recognize our expertise and professionalism and allow us to better support each other after that initial probationary period, right? There is still a requirement that as for tenured folks to have observations, and those could be done with administration, but it also allows us to pursue things like portfolios or action projects, goal setting, student learning objectives. There's a myriad of options that would be available to us. And by all means, I would value a conversation about what's going on there. Because it is really exciting. We want a system that is truly informative and empowering for our teachers. That it allows them to grow as professionals. And I'm going to just take off my union hat, just put on my David hat for a moment. My experience with our current system is that it was a box to check. We did the job. I put on my proper dog and pony show like I'm supposed to do. And like, I mean, I went to get my ed degree in, 20 plus years ago at this point. We called it a dog and pony show then. And we recognize, our administrators talked about how valuable for them that unannounced or that walkthrough experience really is when it comes to reflecting on the genuine day-to-day experience in the classroom. Right? It's a system, it works, it's okay. I don't know that it's getting us everything that we want out of it.
Oh my gosh. That. Mic drop. Close this out.
What is the next step around this process?
We need to decide what our next steps are. I think this was meant to be, well, we
Yeah,
can get to
just-
the.
Maybe just like a couple things.
Yes.
Something that is, so the other piece is, the board plays a determining role at the end here. So the question to the board would be, we have templates, we have structures of what information the board has wanted to see historically, and what that's going to look like, all those pieces. So the question for the board is that still what you want to see, or are there other pieces of evidence or specific things that the board would like to know and understand when they're making the choice to tenure a teacher or not?
What is the best way for board members to see, I guess, the information that is within our control?
So the board gets tenure recommendations, right?
I guess I meant more on like the overall process or.
No,
Okay.
hang with me here.
Right.
The board gets tenure recommendation, like forms, and in it, it's gonna show when the observations were, have a write-up of all this information, right? And some of those are more robust than others, but it's up to the board to both set the standard and expectations around what it is we'd like to see, and then we can, that will then have a trickle-down impact on what it is that folks are looking at. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is, as we work with our to sort of develop this new APPR process, if there's things that the board would like to see more of, we're certainly welcome to provide us with that information.
Well, I'm disappointed we didn't get to see all the numbers, so let's make sure to add
Oh.
that to the top of the.
Yeah.
We can.
And it is in the slide that is saved up there, just, and maybe I'll just say, I think we have, yeah, where's that?
Which slide?
Oh, well, I mean, the slides I have it by subject area in schools, but what's my total number? It's a good number. It's probably 100 teachers that go into the process right now, at least. So.
And how does that differ from like time?
I'd have to do the research to find out.
Thank you,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
I think you guys have it, but